Hey guys, it's Emma Figgling with TYT Politics. How's everyone doing today on this Tuesday? It's a lovely day here in the New York area. Hot, sunny, not too hot. That's what we need. And it's also a big day in terms of electoral politics. We have two states with big primaries. Well, really one state. Arizona is having a primary right now, but John McCain is favored to win that by like 40 points at this point because his challenger's real only argument against him was that he's too old, which, like, kind of dumb. Not that I agree with John McCain on most anything, but that race seems to be pretty locked up. But we do have some important primary races in Florida. Obviously, Debbie Wasserman Schultz versus Tim Canova. If you guys have been watching our coverage of that, Jordan and I were down in Florida for a long time covering both the Tim Canova, Debbie Wasserman Schultz race and Alan Grayson's primary race for the Senate versus Patrick Murphy, a corporatist Democrat. So big race today. And I wanted to let you know what I thought about their chances and what I thought about what was going on down there in general. Also, I don't want to forget Rubio is also being primaried down there. He's facing off against Carlos Berruff, who basically self-funded his entire campaign. He put $8 million into his own campaign, and it looks like that's going to fall on his face because he's losing 61-22 to Rubio. So it looks like Rubio is going to be the Republican nominee for Senate, facing off against whoever wins the primary between Patrick Murphy and Alan Grayson. But first I wanted to talk about Debbie Wasserman Schultz versus Tim Canova because I think that is obviously a race that you guys care so much about, and she's a symbol of the corruption that we hate so much in the Democratic Party. She rigged the election against Bernie Sanders. She has not really passed or supported any piece of substantial legislation in her recent tenure. When we were down there talking to her constituents, a lot of people were saying that they thought that she was a warrior for them back in the day, but she's completely sold out. She's basically a fundraising machine for the Democratic establishment, and that makes sense. That's what we've seen from her on the national level, and that's what her constituents think as well. Or at least the volunteers for Tim Canova, and why they've switched over to him for obvious reasons. She was too inept to adequately run the DNC and do her primary job, which was fundraising for the Democratic Party, without all of these corruption scandals. So the fact that she's in this close of a race and is leading in most polls is beyond me, but I do think that there are a few lessons that we can learn from what's going on down in Florida. So this morning, Debbie Wasserman Schultz tweeted out a variety of endorsements for her. The whole Democratic establishment is behind her. Barack Obama, President Obama has endorsed her. Hillary Clinton obviously endorsed her. You know, when someone steals the election for you, you gotta endorse them. Nancy Pelosi, just all of these Democratic big cats have endorsed Debbie Wasserman Schultz. Why? If you care about policy, that's beyond me, but nonetheless, here we are. So this morning, Debbie Wasserman Schultz tweeted out the two major newspapers in her local area have endorsed her, and normally I don't think that that's very important or interesting because low-key, the newspaper endorsements are a thing of the past. A lot of campaign managers and press people still care a lot about if you get a certain endorsement from a certain local paper. But it is a little more relevant in this case because who reads newspapers, local newspapers predominantly? Old people. And older people are her voter base. So she got the two endorsements from the two local papers, the Sun-Sentinel and the Miami Herald. Again, the endorsements are not the biggest part of this story for me, this particular aspect of the story. It's the wording in the endorsement. So she tweets this out. It's election day and I'm proud to be endorsed by both my hometown papers. Thank you, Sun-Sentinel and Miami Herald. So the Sun-Sentinel headline is, Debbie Wasserman Schultz deserves to be reelected. Really? I don't think if you asked anybody outside of that specific community or any other Democrat nationally, they would agree because she can't even run the DNC, but I digress. She knows the issues and can articulate them better than most. Okay, that's a matter of opinion. She's a tenacious leader and unafraid to ruffle feathers. Yeah, ruffle feathers of people by cheating. That ruffled a few feathers. Has built important relationships with people who matter. That's in the endorsement. Oh, I see. It's because she's cozied up to the Democratic establishment figures that matter. That makes sense. Her colleagues say she's one of the smartest and hardest working members of Congress. What? She hasn't passed dick in the past few terms that she's been in. But I just thought the fact that they said that she's built important relationships with people who matter as their primary reason for their endorsement, it was hilarious to me. And the Sun Sentinel, that is the same publication, in a little bit of a segue, that conducted the most recent poll that I gotta inform you guys about. It's not good news for Tim Canova. But again, here are some caveats. 400 people were only surveyed, but he was down by 10 points in that survey, and the margin of error is 5 points. So I believe that it's going to be way closer to a 5-point swing between the two. 400 people is a small sample size. That's why the margin of error is 5 points, which is fairly large. And the reason the Sun Sentinel endorsement is important is because it almost exclusively covers Broward County, and a lot of older people in Broward County are going to be reading the Sun Sentinel. But interestingly, in 2012, the Sun Sentinel endorsed Mitt Romney, meaning they're a fairly conservative-leaning paper, so it kind of makes sense for them to endorse endorse Debbie Wasserman Schultz. But that same district is very heavily Democratic, so whoever wins this primary is going to get the congressional seat. So kind of a weird disconnect there, but you know what's the difference is what people I think aren't really understanding is that even if an area is Democratic, it doesn't mean it's progressive. So that's the new paradigm, that's the new shift that we're seeing, meaning that district, that area went from 68% for Hillary Clinton in the primary and 31% for Bernie Sanders. More about Bernie Sanders in a second. But anyway, when we talked to Tim Canova as well, he discussed how the Sun Sentinel, basically in their editorials against him, have just regurgitated Debbie Wasserman Schultz talking points. But let's be real, it's not looking that good for Tim Canova right now. What I think is a big issue in this primary, there are two issues. One, name recognition. Older people tend to vote, I would say, more on identity politics and name recognition. They may have seen years ago Debbie Wasserman Schultz actually going to bat for them, and then they just kind of do what they've been doing before. In general, again, I don't want to generalize, and just vote basically based on identity politics. So that's an issue there. And it looks like she's going to win, and that's unfortunate. And what could have made a difference is Bernie Sanders. I'll get more to that in a minute. But again, some more bad news. I think the race that's going to be way closer is the Tim Canova, Debbie Wasserman Schultz race. Unfortunately, it looks like Alan Grayson is going to lose. Looks like both of them are going to lose, but I do think that Tim Canova has a better shot. I think Tim Canova could pull some miracle upset, and the polling, if they say there were some inaccuracies with the polling, say they heavily favored home phones over cell phones, something like that. Basically only looking at older voters. That could make a difference for sure. So I'm really hoping, as a progressive, I'm hoping that that's the case. But we don't know. Alan Grayson is heavily trailing Murphy by 10 percentage points in the most recent polls. And that's basically because of a smear campaign that was put against him of some unfounded accusations of domestic violence by his ex-wife, who has, I don't want to smear her, but has a variety of issues. And Patrick Murphy had the funds to launch that smear campaign because he has a very wealthy father. His wealthy father has been a key booster of his political career, with his family spending at least $2.3 million to support Murphy's campaigns. Republican operatives have followed Murphy with a giant silver spoon, and signs say, Privileged Patrick. But it's interesting that Republicans are even going against him, because as has been well documented, Patrick Murphy, the opponent for Alan Grayson donated the maximum legal limit that he could to Mitt Romney's campaign back in 2012. Mitt Romney! And Barack Obama endorsed Patrick Murphy. It just goes to show the power of the Democratic establishment. Apparently in these recent discussions, Rubio and Murphy have been attacking each other. Rubio has already moved past Alan Grayson, which is not good news, and a lot of Grayson's campaign staffers have quit in the wake of those allegations. There's been a lot of turmoil within that campaign. It's really depressing to me because I think that Alan Grayson is one of the best progressives I've seen in my lifetime. I've always looked up to him, and I don't think that he's been treated fairly, especially given the fact that he's stood up for working families so much throughout his entire career. So we don't really have great news, honestly, coming out of Florida. We will see polls close tonight at 7. I urge you, if you live in Florida, to go out and vote. And, I'm not going to advocate for a particular candidate, but where I lean. I believe that Grayson and Canova would be the best two options down there in terms of progressives. So I urge everyone to go vote in that particular district. But what is depressing is that Bernie Sanders really could have made a difference in both of these races. He did not even endorse Alan Grayson. Or publicly, I guess, Alan Grayson was the third member of Congress to endorse Bernie Sanders. So Grayson had Bernie's back. Bernie doesn't seem to have his back. And Bernie certainly didn't have Tim Canova's back. You can go to youtube.com/TYTpolitics, where Jordan did a variety of interviews. He did an interview with Tim Canova when Tim was wondering why Bernie Sanders and his team weren't returning his calls. Jordan did a separate interview with a former Our Revolution staffer and Bernie staffer who quit over the fact that there was a specific tax status that precluded them from specifically coordinating with the Tim Canova campaign. I'll read to you from an Atlantic article that covered essentially the same thing that we covered yesterday, but since this is Facebook Live, I can't really show that video right now, so I'll read to you what they said. The political revolution has let Tim Canova down. Bernie Sanders hasn't shown up to a campaign for his chosen primary challenger to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the former chair of the Democratic National Committee. Heading into a Florida Democratic primary on Tuesday, Canova is behind by double digits in recent polling and looks likely to lose the race. But that's only part of the story. Former staffers at Our Revolution, the organization created to act as a successor to the Sanders campaign, believe the group did not do as much as it should have to help Canova in his bid to defeat the veteran Florida congresswoman. A number of staffers who resigned from Our Revolution in protest over how it has been run say the organization's 501c4 status made it impossible to coordinate strategy with the Canova campaign, leaving the campaign worse off as a result. At least some departing staffers believe that the organization should be set up under a different legal structure so that it can coordinate with candidates it endorses in the future and do more to help them win. I would absolutely say the prohibition on coordinating hurt the Canova campaign, said Paul Schaefer, a former data and analytics director for Our Revolution. We have an enormous core of dedicated volunteers. But when Our Revolution was set up as a 501c4, that prevented us from mobilizing that big pool of Bernie supporters to work jointly with the campaign to get out the vote. But that's really depressing because this could have been a marquee election for the progressive movement, and Bernie, for whatever reason, for the fact that, yes, Our Revolution couldn't coordinate, but Bernie still could have come down separately and done a speech for Tim Canova. Our Revolution didn't necessarily have to do that. Bernie could have come down and gave Tim Canova the necessary exposure that he needed, despite the fact that Hillary Clinton won this specific district, this specific area, in the primary election. Bernie Sanders' favorability within that particular district right now is around 80%. That could have really helped. That could have helped enormously, but Bernie didn't do that. There's really no rhyme or reason why, in my opinion, except for the fact that, this is entirely speculation, Bernie cut some sort of deal with Hillary Clinton. or other establishment Democrats. I have no idea what happened, but he really left Tim Canova hung out to dry here in the home stretch, because Tim Canova has fallen prey to the fact that, one, it's really hard to overthrow an incumbent, even a disgraced incumbent, because of identity politics. The reason it's so hard to do that is because there's very little turnout in these areas, especially when these primaries aren't on the same day as a general election primary, say a presidential primary. It doesn't give a lot of room for error. So, back in the last election cycle, the turnout in that district was only 11%. It's a very low turnout district. So anything that Bernie could have done to mobilize some supporters of Tim Canova and some people in that area would have made a world of difference. It's depressing because that means name recognition politics are going to win out, in addition to the fact that once Bernie did endorse Tim Canova, a flood of super PAC money went Debbie's way. So it kind of counteracted the deluge of money that came from Bernie Sanders supporters to Tim Canova. I believe he had an average of $22 as a donation, which is so reminiscent of the wonderful revolution that Bernie Sanders waged. So that means that Bernie Sanders' endorsement did have some unintended counter effects and hurt Tim Canova in a variety of ways. We still don't know how the election is going to turn out, but it's not looking that good right now. And I believe that I hesitate to say that we should blame Bernie Sanders because he's the reason that we have these Bernie-crats running. But I wish that he had a little bit more guts in this particular election cycle. Alan Grayson's slogan is Senator with Guts. He wanted to be a senator with guts. We were supposed to have a senator with guts, and that's Bernie. It's depressing, and I don't think that either of the progressive candidates are going to win in this case. And we could have had a more comprehensive Our Revolution structure to ensure that these candidates would win. But again, if you're in Florida, don't use this as a reason to not go to the polls. Like, don't pull I'm not pulling an AP in California and calling it before the election's over and saying that you shouldn't go out to vote. Go out to vote, please, if you're watching this in Florida. So, again, that's the end of this particular story. I really hope that you guys have a great rest of your day, and subscribe to TYT Politics.